you're around this business at all and follow, law in the media, even this morning, for example, there are no shortage of stories about, lawyers and practices moving from firm to firm. It's something that accelerated during the pandemic and has continued through other economic uncertainties, but it's certainly true now that firms are always looking at lateral hiring as a strategic way of growing their practices, growing their firm, and growing their profile. And whenever those things happen, it creates a moment in law firm operations where a lot of things need to happen to complete that integration. Today, we're going to focus on some of those issues and some of those things firms have to do to integrate these partners, with a particular focus on places where research and intelligence feed that process. And sometimes the challenge it can be when already fully engaged people in law firm operations, whether they be in marketing, office management, conflicts, or other areas, are already fully engaged with other things. And then these integration event happens and they have to do so much more and do so quickly. I am really excited about the panel today because we're bringing a lot of those different perspectives to the table. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel, starting with myself. As Alicia said, I'm John Grant. I'm currently the VP of Growth Initiatives at LAC Group, Wilson Allen, and HBR. Prior to that, I spent 4 years as a director of innovative strategies at Greenberg Traurig. Prior to that, I spent 16 years as a director of KM and practice development at Baker & McKenzie. And before that, I was a practicing tax lawyer. I won't tell you for how long, because then you're going to do the math and this whole illusion that I'm in my 30s will go poof and disappear. So I spent a long time in different parts of the industry. I'm very excited to be where I am now, helping to solve problems for law firms. And with that, I'd like to turn it to our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Jean.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, John, and LAC. I am Jimmy Hammerstrom. I am the CMO at Benish. We are headquartered in Cleveland, but we have offices in Columbus and San Francisco and Wilmington, and trying to think where else, New York. So we, over the last, I'd say 5 years, have grown tremendously, especially in Chicago, which is the city I forgot to mention. And with that has been a lot of integration, and looking forward to the discussion today. I've been with the firm for 18 and a half years. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jean. And Maria?
Hi, thank you again for having me on your panel. My name is Maria Mason. I am the business director for the Austin office of Greenberg Traurig, where I met John. And I've been with the firm for about 5 years, but I've been in the industry for substantially longer. I've been in the industry for 24 years, and I've worked in firms of various sizes, all of which grew through lateral integration. So it is an interesting topic for me because I've been on all sides of it in some of the smaller firms.
Great. And Paul?
Thank you. So I'm VP of Client Engagement for the Research and Intelligence team at LAC Group. I've been with LAC for almost 4 years. And prior to that, I was with a smaller competitive intelligence boutique called Shift Central. I was there for about 11 years. Starting off as one of the CI analysts, and then eventually moving into that client engagement role. So I've been working with law firms for almost 15 years now.
Great, thank you. So there's our panel. So why don't we jump right in? And actually, I sort of set up the conversation as we're going to talk about lateral partner integration, but I think there's an important step before that that we might want to talk about a little bit, where research and intelligence can play an important role. And that's in how we as firms, practices, and offices, evaluate right fit for candidates. When we're thinking about bringing in partners or bringing in practice groups, how does that process work, and how do we identify the right opportunities? And Jean, I know in your role as CMO at Benish that you sort of play a role in that process, and I'd love to hear a little bit of your experience of sort of like how that evaluation process works and how research intelligence is an important piece of that.
Right. So quite frankly, John, a lot of it is driven by, our lateral hiring is driven by client demand, right? So with that, we sometimes, through our client feedback programs and such, find out where there is talent, but other times we sort of have to seek out the talent on our own. through our own attorneys and otherwise. And we really do have quite a great suite of research that we use. And Paul knows this because he's helped us with some of this in some of the industries that we either want to hire from or we want to actually develop, because we've done both in our lateral hiring. So yeah, so before we even bring somebody in, we have some pretty darn good research done on them, but also on their practice and the industry in which we're going to be working.
Very good. And Paul, what are some examples of some types of collateral that your team can prepare to help with that process?
Yeah, I mean, it can be anything from a deep dive, like Gene said, on an industry, on a practice area. It can be on a topic. So any sort of deep dives that can be used to inform those decisions are things that we've helped our law firm clients with.
Awesome. So we've identified our target, right? We've begun those conversations where we're going to make this lateral partner integration thing happen. And I'm gonna allow myself to use a little bit of a Batman illustration here, primarily because Maria's on the call and she comes from a city that's actually famous for a bat cave. So I feel that I can use. So I love that image of it in all of our work, you know, and having spent a lot of years in law firm operations myself, we know we don't have one, but there's a sense that all of us have that red phone on our desk, right? And when we are needed, that phone is going to ring. So at that moment in your roles, Maria and Gene, when you're sitting at your desk, the red phone rings, it's the lateral integration phone, you know it's happening. You know, what are some of the immediate needs and challenges and processes, and what are some of the immediate things that come to mind, like, okay, these are things I'm going to have to execute on now? Maria?
Hey, thanks, John. For me, it's all about the logistics. So when I know that somebody is coming, the first thing I need to do is make sure that they'll have the resources they need when they hit the ground. And that's honestly things as basic as have the technology set up and ready to go and set up for them when they walk in the door. Make sure you talk to them ahead of time and find out what their needs are going to be so that you can have that set up. Try to have a conversation with them, find out what their support needs are, make sure they have the administrative support set up and ready to go when they walk in the door. The most important thing is that it goes as smoothly as possible so that when it goes smoothly for them, they can make sure it goes smoothly for the clients, right? Absolutely, very most important thing, make sure that you have conflicts cleared and you can set the clients up as quickly as possible, because that's going to allow them to integrate their clients right away.
And Gene, from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, well, similarly to what Maria said, you know, first of all, that bat phone just keeps going off over the last few years, but I wish it was a different color. But what we try to do is sort of what we call an all hands on deck kind of meeting with our senior admin, and everyone has a responsibility. And once as Maria said, you know, once the conflicts are cleared, it's all systems go with whether it is looking at what clients they have and how we can match them to the clients that we have. We already, you know, we put a whole communications plan together, you know, their bio and the news release and all that kind of stuff, but also we want to make sure that meetings take place. So we will already start setting up who they need to meet internally that works with their practice, and also what clients they need to meet with to do some cross-selling. So, and again, with that, we need a lot of research done to figure out how they match up and how they work, how it would work together, and what maybe industries are complementary. You know, so retail and transportation, we have two big hires, you know, recently there, those really match nicely. So let's make sure that we're you know, grouping them together, those kinds of things.
John, and you both mentioned sort
John,
of
if I can pile on
Okay,
to what Gene was saying. Yeah. So that made me think of one other area, which is maybe more BD focused, but I was at the Marketing Partner Forum conference earlier this year, and there was a panel there on law firm content strategies. And the panelist discussion eventually went to lateral partners and how when they join their new firm, they're often eager to start pushing out content. So we'll often hear from our client CMOs that they need some support on that front, right? So either the partners were publishing content at their previous firms, something like a newsletter, blog, whatever it may be, or maybe they just need a one-off piece, something like a white paper that they want to push out. to really get started at their new firm. So I think that's certainly something that I heard at the conference, that these lateral partners are oftentimes eager to work with the marketing and BD team, acknowledging that they're going to be able to help them drive business and hopefully meet their revenue targets.
Well, Paul, especially with thought leadership kind of things, as you know, some of the more high profile partners that we've brought over, they can't bring that content with them. So we got to redevelop that and do it quickly so people know that they are really, the real deal. So to your point, exactly.
Yeah, and I think a consistent theme through this discussion, and it'll keep popping up, is the challenge of making all that happen within a firm where everyone across all the different operations groups are already fully engaged in the day-to-day blocking and tackling of the firm, right? And I think Paul, it's where a strategic partner like you can be very valuable, is as you bring in these people, you bring in this whole new set of needs that the firm may not be right sized to face yet. And that's where having, a trusted third-party partner to say, hey, we can come in and immediately support the thought leadership of this new practice. And maybe that becomes the long-term solution, or maybe just an opportunity to cover the flex that's required to fully integrate and get these new practices up and running.
Exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And Maria, I don't know if you've encountered this too, but there are also some practices that come on board that I'm like, I don't know what that means. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years and I'll be like, I don't understand the practice. What exactly is that practice with the metaverse or, whatever it is? And I'll be like, I need help to help me understand this so that I look like I know what I'm talking about too,
Absolutely. I have encountered that. And that's where it's really important to communicate fully with the attorney who's onboarding, because they can tell you not only what it means, but really what the unique resources are that practice group would need that you may not have pre-planned for them. So the more of that you can do in advance, the more conversations you can have in advance, the smoother the actual transition will go.
Yeah, and that's, another one of the challenges, right, as we talked about a lot of preparation for this, is how many different parts of the firm have to be in the room for these things to be successful, right? And we've all had that experience where when one of those elements is maybe brought into the room a little bit later than they should have been, how that can create kind of this cascading issue of making these things, work effectively the way that we've talked about. And speaking about efficiency, turning a little bit, so we've talked a little bit about, what are the things that have to happen? Obviously, there's a huge, push with conflicts. And I love the point you made, Maria, that at the end of the day, it's all about the clients, right? We're talking about integrating partners, but for that to even be successful in any measurable way, what we're really talking about is that integration has been seamless and effective for those partners' clients. I know there are days with grumpy laterals where it may feel like in the moment they might feel they're more important than the client, but that's, having been a practice attorney myself, that's a little bit of a sickness we carry with us, so we'll set that aside. But one of the things when the firms are making these investments in this motion to bring these practices in or bring these partners in, there's obviously a drive for realization as quick as possible, to seamlessly get the clients going, to get revenue going, to basically reinforce the potential of that book of business that this practice or attorneys have brought in. So there's a lot of talk about speed. What are some best practices, or what are some things you see are effective at keeping that motion going? But I'll also throw another piece of the question, because to let the audience know, when we were preparing for this, I kept wanting to talk to Maria and Jean about speed. How do we do this faster? And they both almost in unison brought up the point as well. Sometimes it's important at certain moments to go a little slower. So feel free to look at both, but best practice wise, what have you seen really work in sort of making these things smooth and moving at the appropriate speed? And Jean, I'll kick off with you.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I'm fortunate in that I'm part of the recruiting process. So I already know basically like who we're really looking at bringing on board. So that helps with the speed, because I already know in my head, let's start moving on my end of things so that we're ready to go. I mean, and quite frankly, we all have checklists and, use software that tells you, when they're coming, who's coming, what needs to be done next. We use something called Vintegrate that helps us keep track of all these kinds of things. So I think having a good process with everyone is important, but if you're part of the actual recruiting of the individuals, you can really play a good role in getting the ball rolling early.
I'll just add on to that. We're very fortunate to have a dedicated recruiting team and a dedicated integration team. And through that dedicated integration team, we really have developed a great system that's can be replicated person over person. By the time it comes to me in the office, they already know a little bit about the firm and the people here. And then what we do is make sure that they meet with all of their local resources. So they're going to meet with accounting, they're going to meet with information governance, they're going to meet with IT, they're going to meet with HR. If I can, I'll put their administrative support person together with them for a few minutes so that they can get to know each other in advance, so that they know that not only the fabulous firm-wide resources that we have, they also actually have a human contact person who will be on the ground in the office or in a nearby office handling their direct needs. And I think that's a really important component of it.
Cool. And now the uncomfortable flip side of that question. We all know any stories told will be from prior firms none of us are at anymore. But, you know, any sort of stories from the past or war stories of, you know, when the process has worked poorly and sort of what you've learned and applied in the way you're doing it now. I can think a perfect example from a former firm I worked at was directly related to research intelligence. You know, we made a significant investment in bringing in a new practice, and it was particularly challenging because growing this practice involved hiring people out of government. So you had the added challenge of hiring people into the firm who were going to be incredibly critical to our strategy, but didn't come with a book of business. You know, we all know when we have people in our firms who work in government and policy and stuff, that's a little different animal, right? What they're really bringing is their expertise and that added value to the firm. But one of our immediate failure points was just not having the resources and infrastructure in place from a research perspective to be able to immediately support their practice. And they really felt coming in that everything was on them. They were sort of handed a welcome packet and then, okay, well, let's go make this practice. And they just didn't have the resources available to make it work right out of the gate. And it really slowed things down in the beginning. So any similar stories from your experiences or moments when lessons were learned?
So I will tell a brief story. Definitely a lesson learned, and that lesson is don't assume it's going to be easy, no matter how easy it seems like it's going to be. And very quickly, what I will tell you is the most challenging integration I ever did, which I really thought was going to be simple, was merging an entire practice, a whole separate office, into the firm that I worked for. And we thought it was going to be easy because the owner of that practice was married to our managing partner. So we all knew each other very well. We thought we knew all the warts, you know, where all the bodies were buried, and everybody could come together and make this a nice, easy transition. And what we discovered was that in certain ways that was true, and in other ways we had things set up very differently. And this was really about software, client communication, the client intake process with very different software and a very different process. And it became a huge sticking point. And rather than having the ability to collaborate, negotiate, and get it done in an easy fashion, at one point, our managing partner walked into my office and said, "Maria, you are the two most important women in my life, and I cannot be involved in this problem. So you two need to go out and figure this out." And we did, and we're still great friends to this day. But it's just a story about how some outside things you might think make things easier actually cause you complications.
I think having an audience here who all work in law, the whole concept of making the mistake of thinking something's going to be easy, I'm sure resonated with every single person in the audience. I know it resonated with me. Jean, any stories or lessons learned along the way?
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but the old adage, you know, growth for growth's sake will not work. Okay, we tried that once, one of my firms, and ended up having to spin out an entire, you know, office. So that was not a good experience, and we didn't do enough research on it. The other thing is really sticking to our core practice groups and not going outside of those. We're good at these things. So when we try to pretend we're something we're not, that's when it's going to fail. You know, I've done that at several firms where we've had practice groups we brought in that really don't work with our core practice groups. We just did it because it looked like some good numbers, right? And we'll make it work with this, particular group. And we didn't do the research on trends and, is this really an area we want to be in? Instead, we did it again, I think it was growth for growth's sake instead of for the core practice groups.
Yeah, and Paul, thinking about a perfect, thing that addresses sort of Jean's concern there is thinking about some of the things your group can do with market intelligence and that looking around corners and, maybe just briefly talking about some of the capabilities, you have for doing those kind of market intelligence can maybe help a firm see tomorrow today and make some of these good decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm thinking of one particular example where the managing partner of an AmLaw 50 firm reached out and was considering bringing on an entire practice group from another firm in a new market and wanted us to do some research in advance. Because it was a sensitive topic, he didn't want internal people working on that type of research. So he came to us to do research on the entire team, but also on the market that they were entering, who were competitors in this market. They really didn't know this market very well. So we were able to do really that full analysis of the market, what's going to drive demand for legal services in that market, who the competitors are, and then of course doing the research on these different partners from that practice group that they were trying to bring in. So that's just kind of one anecdote of how we've done it in the past.
Well, and that's an entirely new aspect of the discussion, right? Is one of the advantages of having a strategic third-party partner that you're confident in and can work with is the confidentiality of that relationship. Marie and Jean, and I don't know if you want to add anything here, but one thing you can't underestimate it, as much as these things can be a growth factor in a firm and stuff, that sometimes they are challenging to the status quo, right? And sometimes there may be people operating in the firm who threaten might be the wrong word, but whether it's bringing someone into a practice that they sort of feel they have territory over, or perhaps moving the firm in a strategic direction that they themselves as a fractional owner of the firm may not have felt 100% supportive. So using someone like Paul and his team can kind of take some of these challenges outside of the silo where maybe you might get a few too many opinions before it's a ripe time to have so many opinions. I don't know if any experiences with those resonate with either of you.
Yeah, I think, and Paul, this from our long-term relationship, is that if I can bring in a value partner to the management of the firm and say, trust me and trust this person, I mean, my day is great. Because sometimes I can't imagine anyone has this issue. Sometimes a consultant knows more than me, and they look to the consultant because they're smarter than I can be, kind of thing. So, that can help get the point across, or that can help with something we need to get done, then I'll do that. And Paul knows this. I like my top management to know who I'm working with and who can help them. They're a value add to me and to the firm.
And on the flip side, I mean, you and Benish have treated really service providers like us, like true partners, and you bring us in on those internal discussions that are happening. You bring your different partners together annually, at least pre-pandemic, to kind of brief us on firm strategy and what's ahead. So having all that information and kind of feeling like we have a seat at the table has definitely been beneficial and has helped us better serve a firm like Benish.
And so, Maria, to go another angle here, and I want to engage you on this topic, because I think in the role that you play at Greenberg as sort of a business director of an office, that gives you sort of an altitude over this entire process. And I think there are times when, well, I'd almost say you feel like an unofficial project manager, but I think in a lot of senses you're an official project manager when things go on. And one of the things we wanted to touch on here is just how difficult sometimes this process can be when you're dealing with important groups like conflicts, for instance, who are just regularly fully engaged in the business of the firm. How much do you feel sort of that stress when these large things happen of managing expectations with internal groups like conflicts that you maybe need a lot of to make these things happen?
Well, I think that's the challenge anytime you're busy, right? Because and we have such a terrific conflicts team that it's
Yeah.
never a challenge to work with them. But I think that anytime you work among busy people and you're staffed for a certain level of busy, when you have a large thing come in, it just strains the resources. Right now, I mean, I don't really know how to answer what do you do? What do? You put your head down and you do the work, you get it
Right.
done. And that's what we all do. But there is that ongoing push-pull of making sure that everybody's needs are met. And in Austin, because I am bringing someone in, or in a prior firm, think that my need clearly is at the top of everybody else's list, when in fact everybody thinks their need is at the top of everybody's list. And so sometimes it's really trying to help differentiate the priority.
Yeah, one of our shared colleagues from when I was also at Greenberg in Conflicts introduced me to the wonderful concept of a horizontal to-do list. We usually think of a to-do list as this vertical list of priorities, but I think if you work within conflicts and marketing and some of these other groups in a firm that deal with lateral partner integration, all the different constituencies that they have to satisfy, their to-do list is very horizontal. To someone in the firm, everything they do is a top priority. So you could list your priorities that way. And I think, Paul, in your group, does a lot to support conflicts, at some of your firm clients, but there's these moments when a strategic partner can bring expertise. And I think there's also moments when they can simply bring capacity, which
Right.
is sometimes even more valuable than expertise.
Yeah, I think it's capacity, and I think it's also flexibility. So the ability to ramp up when there's those peaks in demand, and the ability to be ready when there isn't. I'm thinking of a conversation I recently had with one of our CMO clients of an AmLaw 100 firm, and we provide research and intelligence support to them, and they're pretty consistent users of our services. But at the start of this year, we started seeing almost double the number of requests that were coming in. And when I had my regular touch base with our client, I kind of asked about it, and what I learned was that they had brought on 7 or 8 laterals at the very beginning of the year. And these new partners were the ones that were driving that demand for research and intelligence. And the nature of the requests that were coming in were also a little bit different. So they had much more strategic requirements to the research request than we were used to getting from this firm. That's because they were driving really this cross-practice collaboration at the firm. So they were really trying to bring different people at the table. And when they were setting up these meetings with clients or prospective clients, they really needed that whole holistic view of who these organizations were, so that they could speak to their different capabilities from different practice groups. So yeah, absolutely.
Paul, that's a good reminder to me that, we do these announcements and news releases on new partners that join, that we should make sure that our partners, the firm's partners, should get those releases too. So you guys are sort of, knowing what's going on. So it reminds me it's a good practice to do.
The last little pivot before we sort of transition from the content part of the webinar to dealing with, questions that have come up. We've talked a lot about the integration needs and sort of the things that have to happen in the back office to smoothly get both the lateral partners and their clients up and running at the firm, the role research and intelligence and information can play in those things like conflicts and marketing and things like that. But let's briefly talk about the fact that, let's be honest, and that the lateral attraction and integration process involves a lot of conversation, a lot of promise making, a lot of making sure that people feel comfortable moving, and then once they arrive, you have the reality of, and I know, Maria, you deal with this in your role, is, okay, I'm here, these are the things I need, right? And when those things that they need are a little bit different than what the attorneys who are already in the firm get, how do you balance from an operational perspective of considering the things they're talking about, potentially moving on to alternatives? And I'm sure you get that in marketing too, Jean. So I'm coming to you right after Maria. But, how do you sort of balance those competing priorities to get things moving?
Well, the good news is oftentimes when an attorney comes in, they have the tool, the software, whatever it is that they're used to using to get the thing they want. And they don't always know that you can get to that thing using a different tool. So the great thing for us is that we often have a tool that does the same thing, that will give them the same end product. But it's just a little bit of a learning process, right? So then it becomes a training situation where you have to, once you learn what it really is they're after, as opposed to, I want this piece of software that I'm used to using, then you can find what we have in-house and help them understand how to use it. I mean, if we didn't have something that would work, then obviously you start to have conversations about whether it's mission critical. This then goes to our IT team to talk about whether that tool is available and what it means. And we can talk about if we're going to then add something on. But so much of the time, we have what they need. They just don't realize that it comes under a different name.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we see the same from the library perspective as well. So our library directors and library managers will meet with these new attorneys in the very first few days of them joining the firm, and try to figure out what they need from a research tools perspective. And a lot of times, again, to your point, they're used to having a certain tool, but this new firm may not have that tool, but we may have the data available from another tool. So it's really having those meetings in the early days. We'll do orientation sessions with them to kind of brief them on what tools are available. And once we really understand what their needs are for data and information, then we can kind of serve it up on a platter of, okay, well, you can actually find this information in different ways. So we're seeing that as well, for sure.
And Jean, from a marketing perspective?
We usually, again, because I'm up front, I'm in the, first meetings with these folks, we get an idea of what their expectations are from supporting them with business development and marketing. So we can sort of plan on that prior to them coming. Now we get a lot of surprises once they're here sometimes, but we initially know exactly what they need from marketing, and then work from there. A lot of the cost is in sponsorships, and a lot of the cost is in event kind of things, and the things that they do for their industry or their clients. So we just prepare for those. But to Paul's point, we found out a lot of them are used to certain research tools and certain library resources, and that can get really, really expensive quickly. So it is nice to be able to reach out to a third party and say, what can you do? Because we actually, that's our library right now. They're the ones providing the research services. So it's very efficient and cost effective to be able to, call LAC and say, hey, this person wants this kind of research regularly, has this kind of practice. What can you do for them? So we can handle it that way.
Well, I know, Maria, I'll get a head nod for, because I think about my prior experiences working, and oftentimes you have this conflict to a promises made at the firm-wide level for things that sit on local office budgets. Sometimes that's a bit of a push and pull too, right? As always being asked at the local office level to do as much as you can with whatever we give you, and then to introduce, I think of it as like, what do we call that in politics? An unfunded mandate. It's like, yes, we want the states to do this, but no, we're not going to give you any federal money. Just figure it out. Anyway, well, thank you to all our panelists. I hope for our attendees, you sort of caught on some of the dynamics of just, us wanting to commiserate with you in the market. Although commiserate's probably the wrong word. Maybe it's strategize is the more positive thing. But thinking from our experiences, some of the challenges we face with these really important integrations that, let's be frank, is one of the quickest and most dynamic ways to grow our firm's businesses, and just how we can face some of these challenges. So we went a few minutes over the content period, but Alicia, any questions from the audience or the chat?
We did get a few. The first one is, are there particular intelligence strategies that can be used to help laterals hit the market running?
Paul and Jean, any thoughts on that?
I can start, certainly. I think doing research on their existing clients and where they've had demand for legal services in the past can certainly be an area to start. I think also, like we discussed earlier, looking at the industry that they're in and seeing, kind of doing a full analysis of, okay, what's driven demand for legal services over the last year or two or five, And then looking ahead, what are trends in that industry that are going to change that mix of what's going to be driving demand for the legal services.
Right. And then internally, I think is working with your finance department on what clients are in that industry you currently have and see where there's some relationships already.
And Maria, I didn't want to exclude you from the response. I know you're coming at it from more of an operational perspective, but
I do.
But any, I think one thing here that can often go a long way is just helping that lateral feel like you've thought a step ahead, right? So to be able to say like, hey, here, welcome to the firm. Here's already some intelligence we've done on growing your practice or your book. I think there's a lot to be said for making them feel like they've come and entered into working with a group of people who are prepared for their arrival and ready to drive strategic decision making. And I know in your role, Maria, that manifests itself in a lot of different ways outside of intelligence, but there's a sense of feeling like the way has been prepared for you that's very effective.
Yes.
Thank you. We have one more question. Does your integration process include debriefs of laterals to identify the best practices they deployed at their former firm? And how is that information used?
That's a really good question. I'll take that. Yeah, that's one of my first questions I ask. What do you like that you're being provided currently, and what type of support you're getting now? Because I can learn from a lot of them are coming from some really great firms like Maria's, and I can say, what worked, what didn't, and how can we help you? And geez, that sounds like a great idea on doing it. So yeah, a debrief's really important on what they experienced and what they expect and best practices. I learn a lot. We even ask our clients at our feedback surveys on what are other firms doing that you like that we're not doing. So it's a good question.
And I think you'll learn that in the conversations that lead up to them joining you. So when we talk to them and we ask, like, what are your needs? What do you want? How can we make this work? You're going to get the answers, all the things that they have at their current firm that they really are sad to be losing or concerned about losing. They're going to tell you that in those conversations. So it's really just a matter of communicating with them to make sure that you hear the things they're saying they need.
Yeah, and we're home right as they say, well, I knew this great guy, Paul, at LAC, and we really think you need to engage him here to effectively. I will tell you, just add a little perspective on that question too. So in my role prior to joining where I'm at now, I had responsibilities for innovative strategies and practice technologies and things like that. And I think whether it's an operational issue, a marketing issue, or technology issue, it's a beautiful moment to take the benefit of some lessons learned on another firm's dime, right? It's what worked, what didn't work, and to really get a perspective on, we had been considering that technology. It's wonderful to hear how you deployed it at that old firm. That really gives us a step up in thinking about the process of whether or not we should explore it here. So whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, to learn what's going on in another firm is great. And Paul, I know part of what you can provide to clients is sort of the benefit of that discussion, even when laterals aren't involved, right? Being people who are sort of outside the firm structure, constantly monitoring the market for whether it's a research tool, a library tool, or even, practice technologies that, you can bring that sort of perspective and have that discussion with clients as well.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, we get to work with some great clients of all different sizes in different industries, practice groups. So yeah, we definitely, I think that third party perspective is helpful for a lot of our clients.